Hey everyone, I have heard this community is really helpful, and I hope it will be for me too. I believe something from my wife's past is now coming back to haunt us. I want to share my story with strangers because even though I suspect my wife is having an affair, there is still a chance I am just overreacting. Given everything happening, it certainly seems like my wife has been unfaithful. I am a 31-year-old man living in Detroit with my 30-year-old wife, and we've always had a great marriage. About 11 years ago, I visited my wife at her parents' house, and her best friend confronted me, demanding to know why I hadn't proposed yet. Let us call her best friend Emily. While Emily was grilling me, my wife just stood by and didn't intervene, so I got the message loud and clear. I cared deeply for my wife, so I was glad they felt that way. After that, I began making plans to eventually marry her. 2 years later, we tied the knot, and now we have two beautiful daughters. Our wedding day was one of the happiest moments of my life, and I always aspired to be a good husband and father. My wife wanted a big wedding, and we had a lot of guests, including some relatives from Puerto Rico. We weren't wealthy, but we were good providers, and our kids always had what they needed. My wife was always an amazing person, smart, fun, with a great sense of humor, which is rare in someone as gorgeous as she is. She was a wonderful mother, and our daughters, aged 7 and 4, adore and respect her. Our eldest even acts a lot like her. I always told my wife how much I loved her beautiful smile, brown eyes, and especially her incredible figure. She struggled a bit to fit into jeans, and whether she wore a sexy dress or tights, her slim figure was always apparent. She took pride in her appearance, which sometimes made my mom think she was a bit egotistical, but I never minded. I work in a renovation project facility, and my wife owns her own nail salon. This never surprised me because she has always been a fashionista, though she disagrees with that label. She was always on top of the latest trends, needing the newest iPhone, heels, and brand name clothes. I would roll my eyes, but it was her money, so I couldn't say much until she became a parent and had to cut back. Instead of maintaining her glamorous lifestyle, she now focuses more on our daughters. She's adapted to using last year's iPhone model and has cut back on designer clothes in favor of Disney-themed outfits for our girls. She only wears her best clothes on holidays or vacations now. Despite these changes, I also had to cut back on my spending. It doesn't matter because our kids are our top priority, and my family means everything to me. Things seemed fine until my wife and I ran into her old friend, SX. Our family was at the supermarket getting groceries, and our eldest reminded us about her favorite Pop-Tarts. My wife told me to go with her to pick them out. After she finally decided on a new flavor, we returned to find my wife laughing and talking to some guy. When my daughter interrupted them with the Pop-Tarts, my wife introduced me to him. She said he was the ex-boyfriend of her old friend, whom we all call Sarah. At first, I couldn't remember who Sarah was, but then I recalled she used to work with my wife before she started her own business. This guy, let us call him Jason, seemed happy to see us and was friendly, so I didn't think much of it at first. Jason and my wife caught up a bit more, and it was awkward seeing her so happy to see him. After a while, I signaled that it was time to head home and make dinner. Jason laughed and said it was good to see us. On the ride home, my wife mentioned how surprised she was to see him at the supermarket and that she was even more surprised Sarah and Jason had broken up. When I asked how long it had been since she talked to Sarah, she said about 4 years. I figured they had definitely lost touch. Initially, I thought that would be the last I heard of Jason, but over time, I noticed that he and my wife were keeping in touch. They started talking on the phone and connecting on social media. She would mention me occasionally, so I didn't worry too much because I felt included. However, their conversations grew more frequent and lasted longer, even late into the night. I started to get suspicious on Super Bowl Sunday. That day, my wife was talking to Jason on the phone when I asked her a question. After answering me, she came back a little later and said Jason wanted to talk to me. Surprised, I took the phone and asked him what was up. He asked if I was going to watch the Super Bowl, and I told him I planned to. When he asked which team I was rooting for, I said the Lions. Laughing, he said he was too, and offered to watch the game with me. I told him that would be great, but we were having a bunch of kids over, and I doubted he would want to deal with that. He laughed and said never mind, then handed the phone back to my wife. I thought that was the end of it, but a couple of hours later, my wife came back and said Jason wanted to talk to me again. He suggested that if I could get away, there was a Super Bowl party at a friend S place, and I could join them to watch the game. My wife offered to call her brother to pick up his kids earlier, so we could go a bit late. I decided to go. After her brother picked up the kids, my wife and I got ready and arrived at the party around halftime. While chatting with everyone, I realized the party was thrown by a diehard Cincinnati Bengals fan. This guy was loudly rooting against the Bengals, and he got his wish when they lost. We all had a good laugh at his expense and enjoyed the get-together. However, I started getting suspicious because of how my wife was interacting with Jason. She was all in his face, and I felt excluded from their conversations. I thought it was because I wasn't socializing enough, so I tried to join in more. At one point, I asked Jason why he and Sarah broke up. He said they were just casually dating and weren't serious back then. My wife laughed and said she was surprised because Sarah really liked him. After a while, I said I needed another drink and walked to the porch where the cooler was. After mingling with some people there, I went back inside. I was looking for my wife and saw her talking to Jason in a corner. I was about to walk over but felt a strange vibe about their interaction. He was too close to her, acting all predatory. I stayed out of sight to observe. He held my wife's hand, and she giggled shyly. Then she walked into the kitchen, and he followed her, staring at her butt. All I could think was, what the hell? Jason moved closer to the kitchen, where my wife was talking to another woman with her back turned to him. The woman noticed Jason staring and must have told my wife because she turned, smiled at him, and then continued her conversation. My wife knew Jason was looking at her, and she seemed to enjoy it. Usually, I love how my wife dresses, but now I was feeling very paranoid. My wife would talk to the woman and then glance back at Jason, smiling at him. He kept looking at her backside, and my wife didn't seem to mind. They tried to play it off, but anyone paying attention could see what was happening. All I could think was, I hope I'm not seeing what I think I am seeing. After the woman said something to my wife, she followed her back into the living room and spotted me. She asked what the guys on the porch were talking about, and I told her nothing much, adding that I was ready to go. She wanted to stay longer, but I reminded her that her brother was still with our kids waiting for us to return. We said goodbye to Jason and everyone else and headed home, especially since we both had work the next day. On the ride back, I had to tell her what I saw. In the car, I said it looked like Jason was trying to hit on her, but she laughed it off and said I was being ridiculous. I let it go, but I decided to pay more attention to them after what I witnessed. He was definitely checking her out. The more I observed, the more suspicious her behavior seemed. She always had her phone with her and often brought up Jason in conversations with me and her best friend Emily. Then she started clutching her phone, talking late into the night. One night, I asked if she was still talking to Jason. She shot me a look and said yes, then hung up after about 5 minutes. After a while, I got tired of her late-night conversations and asked her to talk to him during the day. She claimed she talked to Emily during the day. When I told her it was inappropriate to talk to Jason so late, she laughed and said I was paranoid. She dismissed my concerns, saying I was worried about nothing. My questions did make her stop bringing up Jason, probably thinking it would calm me down, but it didn't. 2 days ago, my worst fears seemed to come true. On my wife's day off, she said she was going to Emily's house to do her mom's nails. I knew about this plan, so I wasn't as suspicious. Later that night, my youngest daughter asked for pizza, and I thought it was a good idea, so I decided to call my wife and tell her she didn't need to cook. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again, and the same thing happened. I wondered why her phone was off, which had never happened before. After half an hour, it still went to voicemail. I decided to call Emily. She picked up, and when I asked if my wife was there, she said she had left. I said I thought she was going to Emily's to do her mom's nails, but Emily said my wife got a call and just left. When I asked who called, she didn't know, but she was mad because my wife had to tell Emily to have her mom come to the nail salon tomorrow. This was shocking because Emily is like a sister to her, and hearing this was just messed up. After hanging up, I called around, and nobody knew where my wife was. So to me, this left only Jason. I got so angry, I couldn't believe this was happening. At the Super Bowl party, Jason told us where he lived, but I didn't know the exact address, just the street. If my wife was there, I knew something was up. I grabbed my keys and was about to leave when I remembered my kids were still in their room playing. I called my mom to see if she could babysit, but she didn't pick up. My best friend David was my last option, so I called him. When he picked up, I asked him what he was doing, and he said his girlfriend was cooking dinner. I told him I needed a favor and, after some hesitation, I told him I thought my wife was cheating on me. David went silent, then asked if I was serious. I told him everything. He said he couldn't come watch the kids but suggested I bring them to him, even though he lived on the other side of town. After getting the kids ready, it took about 30 minutes to get there. When I arrived, David asked if I knew where Jason lived. I told him the street, and he looked at me like I was crazy. The street Jason lived on was long, and David asked if I was really going to drive up and down to find them. I said yes. Before I left, he suggested taking his car instead of mine so my wife wouldn't recognize it. He handed me the keys and told me not to do anything crazy. He offered to come with me, but I said no. It was already messed up that he was involved. He took the kids, and I set out to find my wife, hoping I wasn't too late. After a long drive, I reached Jason S. Street. I slowed down, looking for my wife S. Silver Kia. It was a rough neighborhood, but at this point, I didn't care. All the suspicious behavior from my wife led me here. I was hoping I wouldn't find her car, but eventually I did. Not only did I see her car, but I saw her and Jason as well. She was in a pink sweatsuit, and Jason was wearing just a white tank top, shorts, and flip-flops. She looked like she was getting ready to leave, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The guy had practically no clothes on, and he was too close to her again. Driving past, I threw a fit in the car, convinced he had been with my wife, and I bet her phone was magically working now. Not only did I catch her all cozy with this guy, but now I had to beat her home. When I got home, I was surprised to see that me and the kids had beaten her back. After putting the kids to bed, I decided to wait up for my wife. Almost 40 minutes later, she came in, looking unhappy to be home. She walked right past me without saying a word and went into the bedroom. Her silence blew my mind. I followed her immediately and asked why her phone was off. She claimed she never turned it off and that it had died and needed charging. I asked where she had been, and she insisted she was at Emily S. When I told her Emily said she left, she brushed it off like she was irritated. I asked if she left Emily to be with Jason, and after a moment she admitted it. She said she was tired of me having a problem with Jason and just wanted to drop it because she was exhausted. She asked if the kids had eaten, and I told her we went out to eat. Without asking any more questions, she went to the living room to watch TV and be on her phone. After that night, she was no longer the same wife I knew. She barely talked to me, always texting in the dining room, and looked at me like she wanted to escape but couldn't. It felt like she was acting like I had wronged her when all I ever did was cater to her. And who has their phone die in the middle of the day? I really don't know what to do, but I need to make a decision based on my gut feelings. I don't know if she cheated, but her behavior is full of red flags. I hope I'm overreacting, but the signs are there, especially from the Super Bowl party. They've been talking all day. He's been eyeing her at parties, and she's been allowing it. Now she's meeting up with him secretly at his place. He must be doing her. I'll update when I have something concrete, but I really need to know if I am overreacting. Our first response comes from Miserable Ty 5999. Wow. Really wow. Pack her a bag and have her call Jason to tell him she's coming to stay. No remorse, no sorry, just lies. Again, wow. See a lawyer. Let her know and have her served. If she pulls her head out, you can always call it off. But the ball has to be in her court to fix this. Act quickly and decisively, or it will end in disaster and pain. Good luck. Our next thought comes from DeLoco 6913. She cheated and is still cheating. Walk away from her and set up co-parenting. Your kids are now being raised in a very toxic household. One more comment before moving on. JHS daughter says, they are cheating and you are fine with it. You have children to think of. Divorce her and kick her out. She can go screw with Jason without disrespecting you. Don T play blind. Don T stay for the kids. They don't need a disrespectful mother. You need to stop thinking she's someone she's not. You have likely ignored her disrespectful behavior for a long time. Your marriage wasn't perfect. She wasn't the perfect wife or mother. If she was, she wouldn't be destroying her family for another man. Do not give her any chances she doesn't deserve. Choose you. Choose your self-respect and self-worth. She's not worth it. You just don't want to see it or accept it. Update. My wife might have cheated with her friend S ex-boyfriend. I want to thank everyone for their support and for helping me through this. People here have been guiding me, and it has been incredibly helpful. I was planning to post this weekend, but so much has happened that I had to update today. This is a crazy time for me, and it's blowing me away how right you all are about my wife. At the beginning of this year, when my wife ran into her friend Sarah's ex-boyfriend at the supermarket, I didn't think much of it. She introduced me to Jason, and it seemed like she had just reunited with an old friend, but she seemed a bit too excited to see him again. After that, they kept in touch, and it started to be too much. She began showing all the red flags, and it was looking really suspicious. They'd talk on the phone for hours, like each other's pics on Facebook, and Jason started calling late at night. When I told her it looked inappropriate, she said I was overreacting. She'd laugh and giggle during their conversations, trying to teach him Spanish since we were Puerto Rican. The worst part was at the Super Bowl party Jason had invited us to. At the party, I caught him checking out my wife, especially her backside. She has the kind of figure that turns heads. She seemed aware of it and didn't do anything to stop him. When I told her he was checking her out, she dismissed it. It got to the point where I had to try and find her last week because she wasn't where she claimed to be. She was supposed to go to Emily's house to do Emily's mom's nails, but flaked after Jason called her. When my wife's phone went straight to voicemail, I assumed she was with Jason. I called my best friend David, who let me borrow his car to find her. Driving down Jason's street, I found them. He was practically in no clothes, just a white tank top, shorts, and flip-flops. On the drive back to David's house, he asked what I saw. I told him, and he agreed that it looked bad, especially since Jason had so few clothes on. If I was dressed that way and someone came over, my wife would tell me to put on clothes. It looked like he had just woken up or something. David asked what I planned to do, but I didn't have an answer at the time. After thanking David for babysitting my kids, I surprisingly made it home almost 40 minutes before my wife did. When she returned, she looked guilty. When I asked where she had been, she was super vague and wouldn't give a direct answer. Eventually, I had to drop it, especially since I didn't catch them in the act like I had planned. People here said it would get worse, and it did. Now, she looks at me like I'm her prison guard and barely talks to me. She only communicates with her friends on her phone and doesn't interact with the kids, treating them like a chore. She just sits in our dining room area and texts. I don't even know what to say to her. What's worse is that due to my schedule, I can really stop her from cheating. My wife knows my routine, and I'm sure Jason does too. Between my job, taking care of the kids, and obligations to my mom, they apparently met up while I was out. I know this because she never answered my calls when I was out. My wife's schedule was more flexible than mine since she was her own boss at her nail salon. Whenever I got home, she wouldn't be there, especially if she didn't have to pick up the kids from school. When she did come back, she'd be vague about where she'd been. This really messed with my mind, giving me what I think is anxiety. I'd be with my mom, imagining my wife with some other guy. This has been gnawing at me ever since she left Jason's house that night. If it wasn't for this community, I'd be much worse off. After being advised to calm down and start monitoring them for the truth, I had to man up. After doing just that, I discovered today that yes, Jason was screwing my wife, and my plan worked perfectly. That weekend after work, I bought a voice-activated recorder and placed it in her car. First, I tested it when I took the kids to McDonald's and it worked well. Then I hid it in my wife's car. I felt crazy doing this, but it was my life now. The most important advice I got was to act unconcerned about Jason. Pretending not to care made her ease up a bit. It was hard, but it kept my mind focused on uncovering the truth. When I told David about this, he thought it was a genius move. A few days ago, I retrieved the recorder from her car and listened to what was on it. I heard a few things, but one conversation stood out. While driving somewhere with music playing, Jason was definitely flirting with my wife, calling her sexy. She giggled, and though I couldn't make out her words, she wasn't stopping him. I heard him tell her to stop somewhere, and then it got silent for a minute. Then it sounded like a bunch of guys got in the car, and they drove off. It was hard to hear over everyone's chatter, but I distinctly heard Jason say he wanted to come over. I couldn't hear my wife's response clearly, but I heard her tell Jason she had to leave early and that he should come over. That was pretty much the end of the useful part of the recording. They talked and laughed, with one guy calling Jason thirsty. I tried to figure out who my wife was talking about when she mentioned leaving early. I thought it might be Emily, but it didn't seem like my wife told Emily about Jason. She definitely wasn't talking about her mom, so it had to be the girl who runs the salon with her, Sherry. Sherry is a teenager learning to do nails, but she was the best lead I had. I called up David to see if we could swap cars for the day, and he agreed. After telling him what I heard, he was shocked, called her a high-priced hoe, and hoped I'd catch her this time. Knowing my routine, my wife left after me. I told my mom I'd only stay for a little while because I was tired from work. My mom was disappointed, but her neighbor offered to help out. Around 9, I pulled up to my wife's shop as it was closing. It's in a strip mall so I could hide among the other cars, especially since I was in David's car. Inside, Jason was there, and I was pissed to be right. No one was left except my wife, Jason, and Sherry. My wife was dressed to impress, and Jason was all over her. I saw Jason behind my wife, arms wrapped around her while they talked. After about 20 minutes, they started getting more intimate. Jason was kissing my wife's neck and grabbing her behind, pinning her against the wall while Sherry just watched. After about 5 minutes, Sherry must have said something about leaving, and they smiled and waved her off. Taking Jason's hand, they walked to the back, heading to the basement area. I knew the basement because I'd been there when she first started the salon. She was looking for a bigger place with an office, as the current one wasn't high-end enough for her. She knows how to market something. I was so furious I could barely think. I couldn't believe she would do this to me after everything I had done for her. Jason was a real snake, never giving a good vibe, and now I saw why. After grabbing my voice recorder, I waited for Sherry to leave before making my presence known. When I called out to Sherry, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I told her not to lock the doors and that I knew everything. She claimed ignorance, but I said I'd watched them the whole time. I called her a lying witch, and we got into a huge argument. She said not to blame her for my wife screwing another man, and I called her messy and told her to get out of my way. She said I wouldn't be able to catch them in the act because the door was locked. I asked why they would lock the door if she already knew they were screwing around, and she said they didn't want anyone coming down. As I made my way in, I pulled out my phone and called my wife. Sherry decided to follow me as I headed to the back. My wife didn't answer, so I surprised her by banging on the basement door, which was locked. I didn't know what was going on down there, but if she didn't come up, we were over. After banging 3 times and demanding they come up, there was still no response. Turning back to Sherry, I asked how long she had known about this. She swore she had only known about Jason for about a month, and that my wife started cheating with him recently. She said Jason came in during her break, and after a while, they went down to the basement. She said they would talk about it the next day. I asked if she knew Jason was Sarah's ex-boyfriend, and she said my wife had told her. I reminded Sherry that we had kids, but she said that had nothing to do with her. I said fine, and that I'd use what she told me in court. When Sherry asked what I meant, I showed her the voice-activated recorder and told her she could go home now. Getting back in the car, I drove to David's place. He was a big help, not just with the car but also watching the kids. I told him what I saw, and he and his girlfriend consoled me. While David and I were talking, Emily called my phone. This was the last thing I needed, but I should have expected it. I decided to pick up, and Emily said my wife had told her everything and wanted to talk to me tomorrow. I told her to put my wife on the phone now, but Emily refused, saying my wife wouldn't talk to me now because she knew I'd blow up. Emily said if I came over, she'd call the police and insisted I wait until tomorrow. She promised to have my wife call me and wanted me to calm down. I said, yeah, whatever, and hung up. After returning home with the kids, I got super emotional. My anxiety kicked in again. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. Even after doing everything right with this woman, somehow I ended up here. I thought after being married for so long, I wouldn't have to worry about this. The worst part is that this wasn't a one-time thing. He was screwing her consistently. Now my whole world has to change for whatever reason. I can wait to hear what she has to say tomorrow. I will update when I hear what she has to say. The ball is in her court, and if I don't like what I hear, I'm getting us a divorce. My mind is racing, and I think it may have been a bad idea to leave David's house. I feel alone, but I had to post here since everyone wanted to know exactly what my wife was doing. People were concerned about me talking to my wife after catching her cheating and assumed I would immediately reconcile with her after what she put me through. I can lie. I did want to know what my wife could possibly say to justify her actions. I was in a bad state of mind, and still kind of am. Ever since my wife ran into Jason, who I can now call her affair partner, at the grocery store, things have gone south. It's hard to forgive that, especially since I had to practically chase this woman across the city. Now that I have multiple conversations on my voice recorder, no one can tell me anything different about what has been happening since the beginning of this year. Thanks to this community, I was able to confront this, even though I stumbled a bit at first. But I am super embarrassed at how it ended. After I saw Jason and my wife kissing after hours in her nail salon, I got a call from her best friend, Emily. Emily told me my wife wanted to explain things the next day, and I agreed. But when the next day came, my wife never called. That was fine because I was busy informing everyone about her cheating and contacting a lawyer. After talking to a recommended lawyer online, I had to call him back later since he was leaving the office and had more questions for me. I then took my kids to my mom's house because she insisted they stay with her for the weekend. My mom blamed me for marrying my wife and said she didn't trust me with the kids right now. My aunt, who was in the kitchen, asked why my mom was raising her voice. When my mom explained, my aunt looked shocked, threw up her hands, and sat on the couch, unmuting the TV that my mom had muted to start lecturing me. Even though my mom came down hard on me, I was relieved she was taking the kids. I had a lot going on in my head, and being alone helped me process my anger. David called to ask if I had spoken to my wife. I told him no and speculated she was probably off somewhere with someone else. He said she might not even call, which was fine with me. I was preparing to move on. On Saturday, while trying to clean the house, I heard my wife's keys in the door. I hadn't been paying attention, so I didn't hear her car pull up. My wife and Emily walked in, catching me by surprise. She didn't look like her usual self. She was wearing a gray Nike sweatsuit, no makeup, and her hair was tied up with a rubber band. The shame on her face showed remorse, probably for getting caught. I wasn't used to seeing her like this because she usually looked stunning. Maybe this was only for Jason now. She clearly liked the way he was checking her out at the Super Bowl party. Emily asked me to let my wife speak, and I agreed. Emily said something to my wife and went out to the porch. I told my wife I was surprised she came to talk to me. She said she felt she needed to after I saw her and Jason at the salon. She admitted she was scared to come home after that. When she asked where the kids were, I told her they were with my mom. She looked down, clearly not pleased, and said she was mad that I told Sherry, the co-owner of the nail salon, to spill everything about Jason. I told her I didn't have to. Sherry ratted her out immediately to save her own skin. My wife said they had argued, and Sherry hadn't come back to work. I told her I didn't care about Sherry having a big mouth. She got caught cheating. My wife threw up her hands, admitting I was right, and said she didn't want to fight. She apologized and admitted she didn't want me to find out about her affair with Jason. I told her saying sorry wasn't enough and that she betrayed me. I asked how she could parade this guy around as a friend and then throw our relationship in the trash. She apologized again, saying she let her fantasies with Jason get out of hand. She explained that when her friend Sarah from her old job was dating Jason, she would always talk about how great he was, show my wife their sexting messages, and my wife found it exciting. When Jason came to pick Sarah up, my wife thought he was handsome. After talking about Jason with Sarah, she developed a crush on him. I asked if Jason said something to her back then, and she said he had complimented her a few times, but that was it. I knew something was off when we ran into Jason at the supermarket, as I didn't remember her giving him her number. She said he asked for it, started texting, flirting, and eventually sexting her. She admitted to hanging out with him and some of his friends. I asked if that was the day she was supposed to be doing Emily's mom's nails, but ended up at Jason's house. I named his street to let her know I knew where he lived. She was surprised I knew and asked how. I told her I went looking for her and saw her with him outside that night. I asked again if she screwed him, and all she could say was she was sorry. She said Jason convinced her to ghost Emily and hang out with him instead. When she got there, she waited for more people to show up, but Jason admitted he just wanted to be alone with her. I asked her why she didn't leave when things got out of hand, and she admitted she knew what Jason wanted. She said he got touchy with her and started kissing her, and she didn't stop it. I called her a stupid witch and told her she ruined our marriage. She apologized, but I told her I could never trust her again. She said she wasn't asking me to. When I asked what she meant by that, She said she wanted to pursue a relationship with Jason. I told her she was crazy, but she insisted she really wanted to. She explained that she had always fantasized about Jason and thought it didn't matter until we ran into him that day. She said that when Jason told her he and Sarah weren't serious, it made her happy, especially after he started flirting with her again. She secretly hoped something would happen, and it did when she went to his house that night. She said that while he was screwing her, she wanted to feel bad, but she didn't. After that, he would call her to hang out, and it eventually became a planned thing. She admitted she should have talked to me about it instead of going behind my back. She said I didn't deserve this, and this was the better way to handle it. I told her she was insane and asked if she really wanted to leave her family for this guy. She said it was a feeling she had always had about him and wished to pursue it before marrying me. She told me Jason wanted a relationship with her, especially since she liked him more than she liked me. I asked if she was screwing his friends too, and she called me crazy. I had to ask because I knew she had been driving them around. She said Jason sometimes asked her to pick up his friends and give them rides. I asked if she was now some kind of free Uber, and she just rolled her eyes, saying it just happened. My wife said she wanted out of the marriage because she didn't want to be married to me while thinking about someone else. I reminded her she couldn't date Jason back then because he was already with Sarah, and we were still together. I asked what Sarah would think about her wanting to be with Jason. She said they were just casually dating at the time and wouldn't care now. I told her that might be true, but Sarah would think less of her as a friend, and she'd be right. My wife said she didn't want to argue and wanted to end things on good terms. After that, she left with Emily, who kept peeking her head in before they drove off to who knows where. As much as I didn't want to agree with my wife, she was right. I would hate being married to her, knowing she'd rather be with another guy. She was delusional. But I'd rather let her find out for herself. Living in the house alone was harder after that. I was pissed off and embarrassed. Is this what relationships are like now? Is it that easy to throw your marriage away? I honestly thought that being married for 9 years meant we didn't have to worry about these things. When Monday came, I called off work to meet with a lawyer and file for divorce. Someone mentioned I could get alimony from my wife's nail salon, and the lawyer said if the kids wanted to live with me, it was doable. My mom has been a big help with the kids, but she spoiled them while they were with her and told them that my wife was leaving the family to live somewhere else. When my oldest asked me about it, all I could do was shake my head, thanks to my mom. I had to tell them, and they didn't take it well. Even though my mom did that, it worked in my favor. After picking up my kids, we drove past Jason's house, and I showed them where Mom wanted to live. I asked if they wanted to live there with her. They both looked at the rundown house with a bunch of guys on the porch and said no. I asked if they were sure, and my oldest said, "Not for $1 million." I called my wife during my lunch break today and told her I had filed for divorce. She said okay, and that she wanted to come over to talk to the kids. I told her my mom was picking them up from school because I had things to do. My wife insisted on talking to them, so I said she could come over when I got home, and I'd ask my mom to bring them back after hanging out with her. She asked to pick up the kids herself, and I told her to go to my mom's house if she wanted to see them so badly, but it wouldn't be the smartest move. My wife got upset and said I always hid behind my mom. I told her to go to my mom's house if she was bold enough. Giving a frustrated sigh, she hung up, knowing how petty my mom can be. Since then, I haven't heard from my wife. I sent her one last text saying that all we needed to talk about from here on was the divorce and occasionally our kids. Right now, I'm only thinking about my daughter's lives. Just because my wife gave up on them doesn't mean they are alone. I know for a fact Jason wanted to give up his player life. I hope while she's busy with him, she thinks about that. It's not my problem anymore, and like I said, I'll let her worry about what might happen. I really want to thank everybody here for their amazing support. I was definitely scared to go down this road, but your encouragement made me braver. I've read stories about others catching their significant others in lies like I did, and even worse, some catching them in the act, which would have killed me. I know I'll come back from this one day. My wife's flaws were glaring, especially her extreme selfishness. How could she break all the standards for him and force me to abide by them? It's a question I've heard from good men lately, and it seems so unfair.